Hey, squirrel listeners. Got on my Jack Nicholson One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest hat today, and it sort of blends in with the black back there. Looks like I got half a head, which is the way I feel most times. Okay, if I had known how close we were to the ending yesterday, I would have finished up. Oh my gosh, we were like almost there. So let me try to find. Let's see. Give me just a second. Oh, doggone. Let's see. I may be going over a little bit of what I read yesterday, but that's okay. Alas, cried the ghost, a tear trickling down her frozen cheek. Help me, I beg. I congeal. Congeal, madam, congeal. I remember reading that. Returned Oglethorpe coldly. You have drenched me and mine for 203 years, madam. Tonight you have had your last drench. Ah, but I shall thaw out again, and then you'll see, instead of the comfortably tepid, genial ghost I have been in my past, sir, I shall be iced water, cried the lady threateningly. No, you won't either, returned Oglethorpe, for when you are frozen quite stiff, I shall send you to a cold storage warehouse, and there shall you remain, an icy work of art forever, forevermore. But warehouses burn. So they do. But this warehouse cannot burn. It is made of asbestos. And surrounding it are fireproof walls. And within those walls, the temperature is now, and shall forever be, 416 degrees below the 0 point. Low enough to make an icicle of any flame in this world or the next, the master added with an ill-suppressed chuckle. For the last time, let me beseech you, I would go on my knees to you, Oglethorpe, were they not already frozen. I beg of you, do not do. Here even the words froze on the water ghost's lips, and the clock struck 1. There was a momentary tremor throughout the ice-bound form, and the moon, coming out from behind a cloud, shone down on the rigid figure of a beautiful woman, sculptured in clear, transparent ice. There stood the ghost of Harrowby Hall, conquered by the cold, a prisoner for all time. The heir of Harrowby had won at last, and today, in a large storage house in London, stands the frigid form of one who will never again flood the house of Oglethorpe with woe and sea-water. As for the heir of Harrowby, his success in coping with the ghost has made him famous, a fame that still lingers about him, although his victory took place some 20 years ago, and so far from being unpopular with the fair sex, so he was when we first knew him. He has not only been married twice, but is to lead a third bride to the altar before the year is out. And that's it. And I enjoyed that so much that I picked another one of his stories to read next. So, let's find that one. Aw, darn, where'd it go? It may take me a minute to find the next. Hopefully not long. Oh, we've got this fly in it, or I've got a fly in here, and it is terrible. Terrible, terrible, terrible. Must be a big, huge one because it sounds really big. Okay, Visitor, I think is the one. Yeah, A Midnight Visitor by the same author, John Kendrick Bangs. It says it's taken from the short story, short story collection, The Water Ghost and Others. You already know about Bangs. Read to you about him the other day. So here we go with A Midnight Visitor. It's just full of all these 50-cent words. I used to call fancy words, but that's just how they are. I do not assert that what I'm about to relate is in all its particulars absolutely true. Not understand me that it is not true, but I do not feel that I care to make an assertion that it is more than likely to be received by a skeptical age with sneers of incredulity. I will content myself with a simple narration of the events of that evening, the memory of which is so indelibly impressed upon my mind, and which, were I able to do so, I should forget without any sentiments of regret whatsoever. The affair happened on the night before I fell ill of typhoid fever, and is about the sole remaining remembrance of that immediately period left to me. Briefly, the story is as follows. Notwithstanding the fact that I was overworked in the practice of my profession, it was early in March, and I was preparing my contributions for the coming Christmas issues of the periodicals for which I write. I had accepted the highly honorable position of entertainment committeeman at one of the small clubs to which I belonged. I accepted the office supposing that the duties connected with it were easy of performance, and with absolutely no notion that the faith of my fellow committeemen in my judgment was so strong that they would ultimately manifest a desire to leave the whole program for the club's diversion in my hands. This, however, they did. And when the month of March assumed command of the calendar, I found myself utterly fagged out and at wit's end to know what style of entertainment to provide for the club meeting to be held on the evening of the 15th of that month. I had provided already an unusually taking variety of evenings, of which one in particular called the Martyrs' Night, in which living authors writhe through their selections from their own works, while an inhuman audience, every man of whom had suffered, even as his victims then suffered, sat on 10 score of camp stools, puffing the smoke of 25 score of free cigars into their faces. That's a cigar-smoking bun. And gloating over their misery, was extremely successful, and had gained for me among my professional brethren the enviable title of Machiavelli Jr. The performance, in fact, was the one now uppermost in the minds of the club members, having been the most recent of the series, and it had been prophesied by many men whose judgment was unassailable that no man, not even I, could ever conceive of anything that could surpass it. The fly is in here. Maybe it's going, help me, help me. Surpass it. Disposed at first to question the accuracy of a prophecy to that effect, that I was, like most others of my kind, possessed of limitations, I came finally to believe that perhaps after all these male Cassandras with whom I was thrown were right. Indeed, the more I racked my brains to think of something better than the Martyr's Night, the more I became convinced that in that achievement I had reached the zenith of my powers. The thing for me to do now was to hook myself securely onto the zenith and stay there, but how to do it? That was the question which drove sleep from my eyes and deprived me of a period of 6 weeks of my reason, my hair departing immediately upon the restoration thereof, a not uncommon after symptom of typhoid. It was a typical March night, this one, upon which the extraordinary incident about to be related took place. It was the kind of night that novelists use when they are handling a mystery that in the abstract would amount to nothing, but which in the concrete of a bit of wild, weird, and windy nocturnalism sends the reader into hysterics. It may be, I shall not attempt to deny it, they had it happened upon that had it happened upon another kind of evening, a soft, mild, balmy June evening, for instance, my own experience would have seemed less worthy of preservation in the amber of publicity, but of that the reader must judge for himself. The fact alone remains that upon the night when my uncanny visitor appeared, the weather department was apparently engaged in getting rid of its remnants. There was a large percentage of withering blast in the general makeup of the evening. There was rain and snow, which alternated in pattering upon my window pane and whitening the apology for a wall that stands 3 blocks from my flat on Madison Square. The wind whistled as it always does upon occasions of this sort, and from all corners of my apartment, after the usual fashion, there seemed to come sounds of a supernatural order, the effects of which was to send cold chills off on their regular trips up and down the spine of their victim, in this instance myself. I wish that at the time the hackneyed quality of these sensations had appealed to me. That it did not do so was shown by the highly nervous state in which I found myself as my clock struck 11. If I could only have realized at that hour that these symptoms were the same old threadbare premonitions of the appearance of a supernatural being, I should have left the house and gone to the club, and so have avoided the visitation then imminent. Had I done this, I should doubtless also have escaped the typhoid, since the doctors attributed that misfortune to the shock of my experience, which in my then wearied state I was unable to sustain. And what the escape of typhoid would have meant to me, only those who have seen the bills of my physician and druggist for services rendered and prescriptions compounded are aware. That my mind unconsciously took thought of spirits was shown by the fact that when the first chill came upon me, I arose and poured out for myself a stiff bumper of old reserve rye, which I immediately swallowed, but beyond this I did not go. I simply sat there before my fire and cudgeled my brains for an idea whereby my fellow members at that Gutenberg Club might be amused. How long I sat there, I do not know. It may have been 10 minutes, it may have been an hour. I was barely conscious of the passing of time, but I do know that the clock in the Dutch Reformed Church steeple at 29th Street and 5th Avenue was clanging out the first stroke of the hour of midnight when my doorbell rang. Therefore, if I may be allowed the word, the tintinnabulation of my doorbell had been invariably pleasing unto me. I am fond of company, and company alone was betokened by its ringing, since my creditors gratify their passion for interviews at my office if perchance they happen to find me there. But on this occasion I could not, at the moment, tell why its clanging seemed the very essence of discord. It jangled my nervous system, and as it ceased I was conscious of a feeling of irritability which is utterly at variance with my nature outside of business hours. In the office, for the sake of discipline, I frequently adopt a querulous manner, finding it necessary in dealing with office boys, but the moment I leave shop behind me I become a different individual entirely, and have been called a moteless sunbeam by those who have seen only that side of my character. This, by the way, must be regarded as a confidential communication, since I am at present engaged in preparing a vest pocket edition of the philosophical works of Schopenhauer in words of one syllable, and were it known that the publisher had entrusted the magnificent pessimism of that illustrious juggler of words and theories to a moteless sunbeam, it might seriously interfere with the sale of the work. I may say, too, that this request that my confidence be respected is entirely disinterested, inasmuch as I decline to do the work on the royalty plan, insisting upon the payment of a lump sum considerably in advance. But to return, I heard the bell ring with a sense of profound disgust. I did not wish to see anybody. My whiskey was low, my quinine pills few in number. My chills alone were present in a profusion bordering upon ostentation. I'll pretend not to hear it, I said to myself, resuming my work of gazing at the flickering light of my fire, which, by the way, was the only light in the room. Ting-a-ling-a-ling went the bell, as if in answer to my resolve. Confound the luck, I cried, jumping from my chair and going to the door with the intention of opening it, an intention, however, which was speedily abandoned, for as I approached it, a sickly fear came over me. A sensation I had never before known seemed to take hold of my being, and instead of opening the door, I pushed the bolt to make it more secure. There's a hint for you, whoever you are, I cried. Did you hear that bolt slide, you? I added tremulously, for from the other side there came no reply, only a more violent ringing of the bell. See here, I called out as loudly as I could. Who are you anyhow, and what do you want? There was no answer except from the bell, which began again. Bell wire's too cheap to steal, I called out. If you want wire, go buy it. Don't try to pull mine out. It isn't mine anyway. It belongs to the house. Still there was no reply, only the clanging of the bell, and then my curiosity overcame my fear, and with a quick movement I threw open the door. Are you satisfied now? I said angrily, but I addressed an empty vestibule. There was absolutely no one there. And then I sat down on the mat and laughed. I never was so glad to see no one in my life, but my laugh was short-lived. What made that bell ring? I suddenly asked myself, and then the feeling of fear came upon me again. I gathered my somewhat shattered self together, sprang to my feet, slammed the door with such force that the corridors echoed to the sound, slid the bolt once more, turned the key, moved a heavy chair in front of it, and then fled like a frightened hare to the sideboard in my dining room. There I grasped the decanter holding my whiskey, seized a glass from the shelf, and started to pour out the usual dram when the glass fell from my hand and was shivered into 1,000 pieces on the hardwood floor. For as I poured, I glanced through the open door, and there, in my sanctum, the flicker of a random flame divulged the form of a being, the eyes of whom seemed fixed on mine, piercing me through and through. To say that I was petrified but dimly expresses the situation. I was granitized, and so I remained, until by a more luminous flicker from the burning wood I perceived that the being wore a flaring red necktie. He is human, I thought, and with the thought, the tension on my nervous system relaxed, and I was able to feel a sufficiently well-developed sense of indignation to demand an explanation. This is a mighty cool proceeding on your part, I said, leaving the sideboard and walking into the sanctum. Yes, he replied in a tone that made me jump. It was so extremely sepulchral. I can't say that word. Sepulchral, a tone that seemed as if it might have been acquired in a damp corner of some cave off the earth. But it's a cool evening. I wonder that a man of your coolness doesn't hire himself out to some refrigerating company, I remarked with a sneer which would have delighted the soul of Cassius himself. I have thought of it, returned the being calmly, but never went any further. Summer hotel proprietors have always outbid the refrigerating people, and they have in turn been laid low by millionaires who have hired me on occasion to freeze out people they didn't like, but who have persisted in calling. I must confess, though, my dear Hiram, that you are not much warmer yourself. This greeting is hardly what I expected. Well, if you want to make me warmer, I retorted hotly, just keep on calling me Hiram. How the deuce did you know of that blot on my escutcheon, anyhow? I added, for Hiram was one of the crimes of my family that I had tried to conceal, my parents having fastened the name of Hiram Spencer Carrington upon me at baptism for no reason other than that my rich bachelor uncle, who subsequently failed and became charge upon me, was so named. I was standing at the door of the church when you were baptized, returned the visitor, and as you were an interesting baby, I have kept an eye on you ever since. Of course, I knew that you discarded Hiram as soon as you got old enough to put away childish things. And since the failure of your uncle, I have been aware that you desired to be known as Spencer Carrington. But to me, you always have been and always will be Hiram. Well, don't give it away, I pleaded. I hope to be famous someday, and if the American newspaper paragrapher ever got hold of that fact that once in my life I was Hiram, I'd have to hire 'em to let me alone. That's a bad joke, Hiram, said the visitor, and for that reason I like it, though I don't laugh. There's no danger of your becoming famous if you stick to humor of that sort. Well, I'd like to know, I put in, my anger returning, I'd like to know who in Brindisi you are, what in Cairo you want, and what in the name of the 17 hinges of the gates of Singapore you are doing here at this time of night. When you were a baby, Hiram, you had blue eyes, said my visitor, bonny blue eyes, as the poet says. What of it? I asked. This, replied my visitor. If you have them now, you can very easily see what I am doing here. I am sitting down and talking to you. Oh, are you? I said with fine scorn. I had not observed that. The fact is, my eyes were so weakened by the brilliance of that necktie of yours that I doubt I could see anything, not even one of my own jokes. It's a scorcher, that tie of yours. In fact, I never saw anything so red in my life. I think I must stop right there because we've gone about 23 minutes, a little over. And so that'll be the first reading of The Midnight Visitor and the end of The Water Ghost. Hope to see you today at 3, and I hope this fly has left by then. Or I hope I can get him and swat him. See ya. Be sweet. Don't be ugly. Bye-bye.